I got pulled right outside.
You don't know if it's supposed to snow today, it's supposed to blow all day.
Well,
I wanted to keep going.
I know, it's when I got the shower. Yesterday, I did not pay any attention because I was doing something, making cookies and getting stuff done, so I didn't even pay attention to this. And so I was a little surprised, I mean, I heard it blowing, and when I looked out last night before whenever I went to bed, even if nobody's on, you can see, this bright light.
We had plow trucks.
I could see really good, so lay in my bed and look out the window and sleep, I could tell it was snowing. And I could tell it was snowing, but I really couldn't out to see how much. And then this morning, when I looked out, oh crap, I can't even see my. So I think there must have been, and I've been putting my windshield wipers. I forgot to, I didn't think about it yesterday.
Set up. Everybody. It's, borderline on everybody shares everything.
And then when I see how
All
much snow
the
there
strict
was,
rules.
nah.
Only certain people go over there.
Go
do that. Everything else I know is.
That's the way the old belief rush was.
Because we don't mind through around, especially if it's warm out. If it's not blowing or cold, but my fingers get so cold anymore. They were actually.
Goes white, cold, just cold, then goes white now.
Mine hurt like
This
crazy
one
when
starts.
where I went up this morning.
My fingertips get white, cold.
No, right now, because my next carpenter job is in Healy, that they keep playing us.
I will give people a little,
I
can give the abbreviated version of class.
I'm
Yeah, mine get really cold.
gonna go work at Alaska West, so.
I'd rather actually, well, after Christmas, I said, here, warm
Yeah,
blood.
and so now I'm working on those until they finally decide to start working again. Yeah. Those are the days, and I'll be on night shift too.
Milk,
I start
chocolate milk,
between 1:30 and 2 in the afternoon,
chocolate water.
and then get off between 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning.
So it's like, that's chocolate
Yeah, that's not bad.
Cup of coffee, you're going to pour coffee in there? Have you
This
ever
morning I
tasted
did that
coffee?
type of breakfast. Right?
Night shift. Not really, drink that water, don't put just a drop in there, you can taste what it tastes like.
So I had a cup of coffee,
Wait, go ask your mom first. or your
sit
dad.
down, while I
Jim wants to give you just a tiny taste of
dropped
coffee.
the cookie in my coffee and accidentally.
Do you need Benedict?
It was Alaska.
Was it?
Yeah, it wasn't bad, but it was very messy.
Very good. You'll like it.
Some people, it's fun.
Spilled it all over my phone.
Yeah, Galen, he was on that really one.
Your coffee, our cup holder,
Now he works
I
all
didn't come
the
back and
nights.
raisin it.
When I show up, he's there,
No cookie.
when he shows up, I'm there. So there's one that's- I still drink it on this there.
I did,
why wouldn't you?
ate the cookie.
Yeah.
Bring that cup here.
Oh yeah, we got.
Come on.
Just ISOs, methanol, diesel.
I know, come here.
Sulfuric acid. Yeah, use that for miles. Good for dissolving everything except for roll. They've changed up some of the dates for places that they work. And
Doing good.
they've changed.
Better.
I finally seen her yesterday, it was the first time I seen her
I
for one
don't
while.
know who it was with, but there was a huge bid that Alaska West was put in. And
Was
with
working,
that bid,
so
they're gonna buy it,
it still matters.
build a whole brand new shop. But somebody else. Our shop's works fine just right now.
Not fun, but
She likes it, but she don't get, she's not 18 until May, so she's not allowed to use the knives or the stove. So she just says things like
You might be
that
down here
and
another year or
cookies
two.
and things like that. It's putting it out.
tell it. Sharpen your knife. Don't cut to your body. Cut to your body. I didn't know that's all.
I look at it.
Cut to your body.
there. Come off, also really bad, but my dad comes home. Why the scissors yesterday?
We got to the shop at 4, headed this way.
Here,
Halfway there.
yeah. There's house around here.
Ding, 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 ding. Pull over, lay down, a little cutting edge,
How long did that?
hanging there, running underground.
Oh, no.
Thanks, guys. Because the trick is you can hear when the bolts start loosening up, because the bolts themselves are really like fun. Ringing sound, that's how you know the bolts.
If she could do anything, she had a bomb right here.
Supersonic
I would.
vibration
Did
systems.
not hear. Oh, yeah.
If the guys use the bolts,
Yeah, you have to be.
we always put old bolts on because
I like
they don't stretch as much as and instead of stretching, they can pop and break. And you need to put new bolts on because that OSHA, it stretches, well, they get it to the right torque. Well, as soon as it starts vibrating, it just loosens up, so they fall, all bolts.
Oh.
You bolt run, ding dongs, just run the old bolts. So, anyway, got here. Notice plow all the way back there.
No, we do one sitting
Put it in
down.
the shop. Can't figure out how to get it to back and forth.
So she's just like, oh, thinking knows it all.
Because the new mechanic is taking up a bay that has to crane. Can't get under there tight bolts. And it's blizzard blowing in the shop. The phone's gonna ring, can't do it. It's just me. Don't know again, it's not another operator.
Yeah.
5:30.
I seen you then yesterday, I was.
What time? Oh, so probably 2:30.
I had a trouble balancing.
Chris was there by himself.
I had a blast. I might as well give people a
Because I
little
dropped
while.
coffee, but I did not
I mean, just skip it.
let go of the water.
I think I
Don't need to ask her.
Quick, you go.
I really
34.
picked 435. Which,
do that.
the fact that everybody chance to get some of the animals that are in it, like, is it a cormorant or a pelican or an owl?
Oh, yeah.
Other than that, it's really mostly pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I don't know how significant that is anyway.
Right, I don't think it is, but if you're interested, it's like, how'd they come up with all those different things? It's like, well, the Hebrew book is pretty much like an unclean bird, so insert, if you're not a clean bird here.
In other words, it's scavenge on dead stuff in the desert.
Yep.
So don't be around. No, I mean, that was.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the point of it, yeah.
How they determined what an unclean bird was, any bird that scavenged on dead animals.
Yeah, unclean pig. Oh, that one got me though.
I like the water.
Can't hardly do that one.
I like short things.
Unclean shrimp. Oh, that one's tough too.
It's not long.
Unclean crab, lobster, all those unclean things.
This one looks good.
So the unclean, that word,
Oh,
the Jewish word is kosher. Or not kosher.
I'll be shocked.
I wanted for Chris.
Kosher's clean.
I mean, yeah, because I'm liar.
So it's either kosher or unclean. That's the two. It's not unkosher. I don't know what the word is. Right, they use the anti-kosher word.
Not kosher.
Not kosher. It's not kosher enough.
My Christmas gift for her was from January. I could have paid the extra $30 for a 2-day shipping, but it's not gonna give a
Tim, are you coffee or
That's the last one. 2 days.
I drink either coffee or tea. I like warm beverages.
Yeah.
Oh, I like the young bag. What does that have to do with coffee? Yeah, I do too, but, okay. Warm
I have
coffee.
coffee in here.
Are you a bean grinder?
No, I was just thinking, I started Make coffee at home, but I usually don't make it at home. I just drink it warm or make tea at home. And I had a bunch of, they're sending me promotional packages on shops. Get a bunch of magneto packs and all the packages. Everything and all. So I made coffee day 2 yesterday. And kind of like, oh, this coffee. I need to get the grinder and use beans here if I can get coffee.
Are you a Folgers guy?
I'm more like
Oh,
like good coffee, really good coffee. Otherwise I'll just drink tea.
I only asked that because I bought a 3-pound can of Folgers. High caffeine. Did you see it? It is. It's too much for me.
I can't do my caffeine, caffeine takes me very if I have too much of it. Everything shoveled in
Are you a big drinker?
I do, when my brother, gave me the caffeine.
No, there's all that.
And he, roasted something. And so I do.
Sure, is that?
I learned.
I'm like, you just got fine.
He just got one lane.
The longer you roast it,
Came back up and got.
the darker it gets, and the more caffeine.
Oh, maybe about me, so.
Super, super, super dark
Yeah, I know.
is lower caffeine.
I didn't know it was, who all was gonna be dark, because I usually buy out first like this.
Well, there you go. Yeah, they don't, I learned that, remember Joe and Dan?
Yes, he's doing the store just the other day. He was outside with the
Yep, they were, he's got about $4,000 roast. He's the one that taught me. So I go, French roast is dark, Italian style is decent, and then there's American roast, and then charcoal.
How many that guy?
And I'm doing American roast and charcoal. I like, and I roast it in a,
See that?
you gotta watch it, but it just keeps toasting right over there. And then eventually, just like. I smoke it. Oh, I like it. Yeah,
So am I.
Oh,
What you guys doing for Christmas?
we're also playing
All right.
something similar to that background. Things that. Yeah, yes. Here's Edge's birdie. We divided the two out. So we had to put it with the car.
All right, we are running late. Fortunately, I thought it was gonna be a fairly short class, and if needed, I will do the abbreviated version. I know a lot of people are having difficulty. Tobias, be quiet. Anyway, do we have any announcements before we go ahead and get started?
My brother's, or my son Gary is gonna have surgery on the 29th on his shoulder, so appreciate prayers for his, everything going good.
Like, so shoulder surgery, like a rotator cuff or something of that nature, or just?
The tendon tore to his, completely tore to his biceps, maybe.
Okay, yeah.
And anyway, he's gotta have that fixed.
Mm-hmm. Did you get Tom's plow truck out? Yep. Station. I got my plow truck pushed into a pull-off with the car, and has a hole in the side of the block, because when I was pouring oil in it, I noticed it was just coming back out, because I thought, oh, that was the problem, and it's like, oh, that's why it doesn't have any oil, it's just going through it, so. Some kind of major problem. Also, for those who didn't know, the National Weather Service cut their fiber optic cable last night, so they weren't able to update any of the forecast all day yesterday.
Oh, that makes sense.
So that's why this ended up being so much worse, and we had no clue. They were just giving like watches and warnings on Facebook via an iPhone, and that's about all they were managing to get done at the National Weather Service last night. So last I had heard was, oh, you're gonna have 5 to 8 inches of snow. I'm like, okay, that's a fair amount of snow. No, I stepped out this morning and it was above my knee. So, yeah, it was a lot more snow. But. All right, we're gonna be in Isaiah 34 and 35 here in just a moment. I will lead us in a word of prayer, and then we'll get started. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the things you've given us. We thank you for our ability to gather here, to study your word, to learn more about you. Be with us as we go through the book of Isaiah, prophecy from long ago that we can look at and still learn things from you and recognize that you've had plans for the things going on now that have existed for a long time. Help us to gain from that perspective and to draw closer to you. Be with this class, help it to be useful. Be with those that are unable to be here this morning. We know many people are having difficulty due to the weather conditions and the snowfall. Keep everybody safe that's traveling. Help us to focus on the things at hand. Thank you for your word. Thank you for your son. These prayers and thanks we give in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so before I actually read this, usually the first thing I do is I read a chapter, or in this case, 2 chapters. But I think the biggest thing about this chapter and understanding it is its context of where it lies within this book. So before we get to reading it, I'd like to kind of review where we're at. So as Jeff, he showed us a couple times these Bible Project videos, and they say, talk about Isaiah kind of being split in half, where there's the first half, which has a lot of judgment language in it, and the second half is very messianic. I've ran across a lot of different people that split it up in different ways. I mean, I ran across one online class, they split it up into 9 sections, but I can tell you every single one of them shows a break between chapter 39 and 40 in looking at it. There's a distinctive change, and we're getting close to that. In fact, there's only a couple different things left that Isaiah is going to do before we get to that change and kind of wrap up the first half of the book. In fact, the halves of the book are enough different from each other that some scholars, I don't know, should we really call them scholars? There are those that would insist there were actually 2 different authors and that the first half was written by one person, the second half was written by a different person just because they're so much different. I don't think we have any reason to believe that, but there is a distinct difference between the tone of the first half and the second half. And we're coming up on the end of that first half rather. So the judgment has been pronounced throughout this first half, not just Israel, but many different groups: Babylon, Moab, Egypt, Tyre, Sidon, the desert of the sea, etc. They all had different, we had a section where he was pronouncing the burdens. Sometimes that was translated differently, but he announced the burden against Babylon and against Egypt and things like that. And then he spent a few chapters where he was talking about woes. We studied that, so I'm not going to go into the details of exactly what he proclaimed against them, but I would like to kind of go over that list. Just to put us in mind of he's been proclaiming all these things against people. If we start at like 13:1, it says the burden of Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amos did see. So there we see the burden. If we go 15:1, the burden of Moab, because in the night Ar of Moab is laid waste and brought to silence. So we see that burden against Moab. And continuing on, like chapter 17 says, the burden of Damascus. Behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap. And 19:1 says, the burden of Egypt. Behold, the Lord rideth on a swift cloud, and shall come into Egypt, and the idols of Egypt shall be moved in his presence, and the heart of Egypt shall melt in the midst of it. And 21, the burden of the desert of the sea. As whirlwinds in the south pass through, so it cometh from the desert, from a terrible land. And 22 starts, the burden of the valley of vision. What aileth thee now that thou art wholly gone up to the housetops? And 23, the burden of Tyre, howl ye ships of Tarshish, for it is laid waste, so that there is no house, no entering from the land of Chittim. It is revealed unto them. So we have a couple different things, thoughts regarding that. One, yes, the Lord was proclaiming judgment against those nations or areas, cities in some cases. In the desert of the sea, more of a region, not really a nation, but also. Obviously, he had reason to proclaim that, but also I feel like part of the reason may have also been, how we always used to justify things is like, well, yeah, I know we have lots of problems here, but, we're still better than all those. I can remember, 20 years ago when people were talking about America having various problems, it was always like, well, we're still better than anywhere else on earth. And, in one regard, it's good to be proud of those things, but just because you're better than other people doesn't make you right. And here, he's pointing out those people are wrong too. He's proclaimed judgment against Israel. It's not just Israel. There's all these people that have problems. Then he proceeds on to the woes, which we've been studying more recently. Chapter 28 starts out with, woe to the crown of pride, to the drunkards of Ephraim, whose glorious beauty is a fading flower, which are on the head of fat valleys of them that overcome with wine. And 29:1 said, woe to Ariel, the city where David dwelt. Add ye year to year, let them kill sacrifices. And 30, woe to the rebellious children, saith the Lord, that take counsel, but not of me, that cover with a covering, but not of my spirit, that they may add sin to sin. And 31, woe to them that go down to Egypt for help, and stay on horses and trust in chariots, because they are many, and in horsemen, because they are very strong. But they look not unto the Holy One of Israel, neither seek the Lord. And finally, 33:1, woe to thee that spoilest, and thou wast not spoiled, and dealest treacherously, and they dealt not treacherously with thee. When thou shalt cease to spoil, thou shalt be spoiled. And when thou shalt make an end to deal treacherously, they shall deal treacherously with thee. So that's kind of where we're at. We're at the end of this, and Isaiah is going to do two things before he gets to the end of this first half of his book. He's going to throw out this contrast, this epilogue, if you will, of what's going to happen in chapters 34 and 35, which we'll be looking at today. And then in the chapters 36, 37, 38, 39, it's going to almost be like a historical account. He's going to tell some of the things that have happened and are going to happen. And you read them, it's just like reading out of Kings or Chronicles. It's very historical. So he's going to review that history of what's going on before he moves into the second half. And he's going to make this contrast that he's going to make in 34 and 35 of the coming judgment of the Lord. So really this is, these chapters that we've looked at, that we're going to look at today, are really just in a way, a summary of everything that he's been saying, of the judgment that's going to come, and also of the hope that is coming with it in chapter 35. And I don't have a lot on those, so it kind of worked out that we were short. I'm going to read through them, and then I will point out some things. There is one thing, and I don't have an answer to it, but there is one question I have on like 35 verse 8. The wording of it could be interpreted as almost opposite meanings, and I'll get to that probably last. And like I said, I don't have an answer on that, but it is interesting to look at. So starting in Isaiah 34:1, come near, ye nations, to hear, and hearken, ye people. Let the earth hear, and all that is therein, the world, and all the things that come forth of it. For the indignation of the Lord is upon all nations, and his fury upon all their armies. He hath utterly destroyed them. He hath delivered them to the slaughter. Their slain also shall be cast out, and their stink shall come up out of their carcasses, and the mountains shall be melted with their blood. And the host of heaven shall be dissolved, and the heavens shall be rolled together as a scroll, and all their hosts shall fall down as the leaf falleth off the vine, and as the falling fig from the fig tree. For my sword shall be bathed in heaven. Behold, it shall come down upon Idumea, and upon the people of my curse to judgment. The sword of the Lord is filled with blood. It is made fat with fatness, and the blood of lambs and goats, and the fat of kidneys of rams. For the Lord hath a sacrifice in Bozrah, and a great slaughter in the land of Idumea. And the unicorn shall come down with them, and the bullocks with the bulls, and their land shall be soaked with blood, and their dust shall be made fat with fatness. For it is the day of the Lord's vengeance, and the year of recompense for the controversy of Zion. And the streams thereof shall be turned into pitch, and the dust thereof into brimstone, and the land thereof shall become burning pitch. It shall not be quenched night or day. The smoke thereof shall go up forever. From generation to generation it shall lie waste. None shall pass through it forever and ever. But the cormorant and the bittern shall possess it. The owl also and the raven shall dwell in it. And he shall stretch out upon the line of confusion and the stones of emptiness. They shall call the nobles thereof to the kingdom, but none shall be there, and all her princes shall be nothing. And thorns shall come up in her palaces, nettles and brambles in the fortress thereof. And it shall be a habitation of dragons, and a court for owls. The wild beast of the desert shall also meet with the wild beast of the island, and the satyr shall cry to his fellows. The shrike owl shall rest there, and find for herself a place of rest. And there shall the great owl make her nest, and lay and hatch and gather under her shadow. There shall the vultures be gathered, every one with her mate. Seek ye out of the book of the Lord and read. No one of these shall fail. None shall want her mate. From her mouth it hath commanded, and his spirit it hath gathered them. And he hath cast lots for them, and his hand hath divided it unto them by line. And they shall possess it forever. From generation to generation they shall dwell therein. And moving on to 35. The wilderness and the solitary place shall be glad for them, and the desert shall rejoice and blossom as the rose. It shall blossom abundantly and rejoice even with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given unto it, the excellency of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord and the excellency of our God. Strengthen ye the weak hands, confirm the feeble knees. Say to them that are of a fearful heart, be strong, fear not. Behold, your God will come with vengeance, even God with a recompense. He will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. Then shall the lame men leap as a hart, and the tongue of the dumb sing. For in the wilderness shall waters break out, and streams in the desert. And the parched ground shall become a pool, and the thirsty land springs of water, and the habitation of dragons, where each lay shall be grass with reeds and rushes. And a highway shall be there, and a way, and it shall be called the way of holiness. The unclean shall not pass over it, but it shall be for those, the wayfaring men, though fools, shall not err therein. No lion shall be there, nor any ravenous beast shall go up thereon. It shall not be found there, but the redeemed shall walk there. And the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion, with songs and everlasting joy upon their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. So there you have 34 and 35. Kind of a contrast between the two chapters of God's judgment and God's redemption. Some things I noted. It says Idumea. In the King James, other translations will say Edom. I think one translation I looked at said Esau. Most scholars believe that's, even though it calls out Edom, that it's just a metaphor for God's enemies. The Edomites having been enemies of the Israelites since the Exodus, particularly. They often would reference that they wouldn't allow them to pass through their land. I think it makes sense, but I suppose this could be interpreted as an actual judgment against Edom. And I don't have a lot on chapter 34 that will change it. Like I said, the context, which is why I went over the context of this first, I feel like kind of explains what's being said. It's the Lord's vengeance, it's coming. Those people that he has judged, the judgment is going to come, and it's going to lay them to waste to where, in the end, they're going to be this desert possessed with unclean animals. The one thing I have a lot of notes on that I figured I'd go over just if we had time or not is all these different animals that it talks about in the desert. Because if you read different translations, it gives pretty wildly different animals, like pelican or owl. I don't even think of the two as similar. The word there was quaw. It's bird, and it can means a bird that regurgitates, it throws up its food. So it could be an owl, or I don't know if pelicans do that, but I guess, well, yeah, they carry fish in their mouth. And so that's kind of why it can be translated pretty broadly, because it's really just saying a bird that regurgitates its food. And then it has, like in the King James, it refers to them as different types of owl, great owl and the shriek owl. They're different words there, but they could be owl, but they could mean different things. The bittern in King James, other places will say hedgehog. One translation said porcupine. The word there refers to roll up, so hedgehog and porcupine makes more sense to me. The King James refers to dragons, and others will use jackals. Based on the word, dragons make sense because it's the same word. The word's used multiple times, but the first place I see it used was when Moses threw his staff down in front of Pharaoh. It says it turned into a serpent. That's that same word that King James translates dragons, but other versions have translated jackals, which makes sense to me. We oftentimes think of dragons as serpent-like creatures. So whatever evil creature it's referring to, and that is in 13. It says, thorns shall come up in her palaces, nettles and brambles in the fortress thereof. It shall be a habitation of dragons and a court for owls.
Ostriches.
Yep, that's another one of the different animals is ostriches. And I had that one somewhere. And again, it's one of those things where it's like, well, this ward, that was Yana. It means greedy bird, translated as ostrich or owl. Some feel like ostrich, the reason they went with the translation of ostrich had to do with the big mouth. It represents the greediness there, but so Again, when it comes to jackals being in the brambles and in the weeds makes sense, but also if the word translated dragons would indicate snakes, snakes hiding out in all the weeds in the desert makes sense to me as well. So that's kind of, but the point of all this is these are all unclean animals. They're all animals disliked. In fact, when the King James says striped cow, it is a feminine word, but that word is also used in a legend to refer to a night demon from Edom. So, which I've been in the woods with the shriek owl, and I can see them being called a night demon. They will definitely get your attention when you're not expecting those things. But it doesn't necessarily, the word doesn't necessarily mean owl, so. And he wraps that up by saying, seek ye out the book of the Lord and read. None one of these shall fail, and none shall want her mate, for my mouth it hath commanded, and his spirit hath gathered them. And he hath cast the lot to them, and his hand hath divided it. Unto them by the line, they shall possess it forever, from generation to generation shall they dwell therein. So he says, if you look in the word, I've said these things are going to happen, they're going to happen, I'm going to give this to all these unclean things. So he's basically reiterating this is going to happen. Then moving on to chapter 35 is kind of the contrast to that. Judgment is coming to those people that he has pronounced judgment against, but now he's going to talk about the hope that those that trust in him, and a lot of references in here to the weak and the feeble, and a lot of this judgment has been against those that oppress that type of people. It says, the wilderness and solitary place shall be glad for them. The desert shall rejoice and blossom as the rose. I shall blossom abundantly and rejoice with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given unto it. And it goes on in that verse, continuing with the praises and the glory that is going to happen. And then it says, strengthen the weak hands, confirm the feeble knees. So here we kind of see who this is addressed to, those oppressed, those weak. Say to them that are of a fearful halt, be strong, fear not. Behold, your God will come with vengeance, even God with a recompense. He will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap as a hart, and the tongue of the dumb sing. For the wilderness waters shall break out, and streams in the desert. So just as we've seen all through Isaiah, there's this message of hope. It seems to be addressed towards the weak and the penitent. Of course, looking at it in hindsight, many people will say it's addressed to those in captivity, and that is true. Scholars also believe that the Israelites did read this a lot while they were in captivity. And it is comforting. Verse 7, it says, and the parched ground shall become a pool, and the thirsty land springs of water. The habitations of dragons, where each lay, shall be grass with reeds and rushes. So again, that word that King James says dragons, and other translations translate jackals. The root word does seem to rest with serpents. So the habitation of dragons will become grass with reeds and rushes. And then verse 8. I haven't figured out verse 8 because there's a couple different ways you could read it depending which translation you use as to how they word it. It's kind of one of those things, it just depends on where you put the comma, I guess. So it's not really the wording, and I went to the Hebrew and I kind of came up with the same thing. It's like you could take this one of two ways. It says, and a highway shall be there, and a way, and it shall be called the way of holiness. The unclean shall not pass over it, but it shall be for those, the wayfaring men, though fools, shall not err therein. So, in the King James is a comma there. It says, the wayfaring men, though fools, shall not err therein. So it pretty much sounds like, and let me see if I can find a Danny, do you have the New American Standard?
No,
Okay.
I am English Standard.
I think it actually makes it worded more like the King James. But if you go to the New American Standard, it says, and a highway will be there, a roadway, and it will be called the highway of holiness. The unclean will not travel on it, but it will be for him who walks that way, and fools will not wander on it. And yeah, I managed to find, hermeneutic stack exchanges where people were discussing this, because it's like, I don't really have an answer as to which way it actually means, as to whether it means those wayfaring men, even if they're fools, will not err on it. And that's the way the majority of translations read, because the comma's inserted and it's worded that way, indicating that even if you're a fool, you're not going to err on this way. It's like, you won't be able to mess this up even if you're a fool. This highway is very obvious. Or does it mean like the New American Standard here, where it says, but it will be for him that walks on that way, and fools will not wander on it. So are they saying if you're a fool, you're not going to be on this highway? Or are they saying even if you're a fool, you're not going to err when you're on this highway? And yeah, I don't actually have an answer on that. Having read that, that's one of the great questions about that particular verse. Probably the great question that arises out of that whole chapter. So, if anybody has any opinions on what that means.
English Standard Version says the unclean shall not pass over it. But then if you go to, let's see, 52:1, it alludes to 52:1, awake. So Isaiah 52:1, awake, awake, put on your strength, O Zion, put on your beautiful garments, O Jerusalem, the holy city, for there shall be no more come unto you, the uncircumcised and the unclean.
Yeah, the English Standard Version does say the unclean shall not pass over it. And all the versions say that. Then it goes on and repeats itself towards the end. It says, it shall belong to those who walk on the way. Even if they are fools, they shall not go astray.
Right.
Which is worded, that reads the same as what the King James does, where though you're a fool, you should not err therein. And the New King James reads the same way. Whoever walks the road, although a fool, shall not go astray. So really, it's the New American Standard primarily that is the only one I ran across that's worded in such a way as to make it sound different. But even when I looked at the Hebrew, it's like, well, that could be worded either way, because the original text didn't have like a comma here or a comma there. So it's like, well, it could mean either thing. But I know I've ran across a lot. It sounds really nice. I kind of like the way it sounds like it means in the King James, where it's even if you're a fool, you're not going to mess this up walking in the way. Even if you're not, a scholar or anything, you're not going to mess up this path. I like that interpretation. I'm just not convinced, since it sounds like it could be worded either way, as to which is the most accurate. That's pretty much all I have. So I will wrap it up, and we can prepare for worship.
I have to finish
You know, Jesse was just so much Yes.